Good morning, friends. How are you all? Welcome to today's episode of the Checkin In podcast. We are on episode number 94. Today is a special day here in Canada. Here we are remembering, I was about to say celebrating, but no, today is a day of remembering. We are remembering the sacrifice of those who have invested their lives and given it for the purpose of ensuring we have this kind of a lifestyle where we can listen to podcasts like this, where we can live in liberty and freedom and democracy. And so, yeah, today is a special day. And it's one of those days that I was just reflecting on last year when this point came in the year. It was snowy here in Calgary. It was cold, it was overcast, and I'd taken my trumpet and I'd played the last post and the reveille at one of the memorials, actually at two of the memorials here in the city. And so I was reflecting on that last year. And so here we are a year later, again, remembering with gratitude a whole year that has been full of so many things going on. And yet we still can unite despite our differences in remembering and saying we're very grateful for those who have given their lives and committed to fighting for our freedom. So that's pretty amazing. So, yes, that's what I'll be doing after this podcast. I'll be taking my trumpet here. I'm actually going to show you guys my trumpet. Here is my trumpet. I'll be taking my trumpet this morning to play at one of the memorials here in the city. Just a few blocks from my place here, and serving that way. So, happy Remembrance Day, friends. Same in the UK, Ollie says. It's awesome. And on top of that, I also have in mind what our podcast today is. Kind of reflective of, again, these kind of decisions that I make along the way. But I'm really thrilled to have you guys join in for episode number 94. Welcome, welcome. I'm glad to see you all. Wherever you're listening in from, whether it's the recording or the live stream. The live stream is, of course, on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and of course, the Spotify account records this podcast as well. Today, we are answering an interesting question. It's a question that I've also saved for last. I've saved this question for last because as I come near the end of my list of 100 questions that I've been going through, these are the questions where I'm like, I'm not sure I know what to say about this yet. I'm not sure I'm quite comfortable with this yet. But today's question goes as such. We're asking, when was the last time you threw caution to the wind? When's the last time you threw caution to the wind and said, to hell with it, and you embarked on a certain trajectory? Some of us may answer this question a little easier. For others, it may be like, I have no idea. I don't know what this looks like for me and how I'm responding to it. So I would love to hear and see how this question hits some of you guys. But as we usually do before we dive into the question and answering it, we like to look at the question and say, why is this question even worthwhile answering in the first place? What is so special about this question? And I think when we do this, when we are able to slow down and just say, let's consider our approach to this question. What are some of the facets? It's kind of like what a jeweler might do. So a jeweler, when he's assessing the worth of a diamond, he doesn't just glance at it and say, okay, I'm going to offer you this. What they'll probably do, I'm just guessing, is they'll take that stone, that rock, that diamond, and they'll look at it from various angles to be able to scrutinize it and see how they're going to appreciate that stone. They're going to look at its quality, they're going to look at its clarity. There's a whole bunch, I think there's 4 C's that they usually go for, right? When you're looking at a diamond, and they'll kind of assess it on all these various criteria. That's what we do with these jewels of questions that we ask, these self-reflection questions. We're looking at them before we answer and commit to answering them because we want to catch the full flavor of what's going on in these questions. And that's a really helpful thing when we are able to think through and process what is it we're being asked, what are some of the nuances in what we're being asked, and how can we answer the question in a really helpful way that enables us to get a little further in saying, this is why this is worthwhile. So I hope you find tremendous benefit as you listen to yet another episode where we do the same thing we always do as we pursue being better versions of ourselves in the three key pillars. There's three key pillars that most of my regular listeners are familiar with on this podcast. Those three key pillars, you can recite with me, and I don't mind you reciting with me, because when we do that, we remind ourselves on a daily basis why these things are important. These are the three key pillars that I've sort of like identified in my experience in life to say, focus on these things, and you are well on your track to some betterment of who you are and how you're engaging this world. Number one is the awareness piece. I say it is so critical for us to know ourselves well. And I say that's critical because I don't think most of us are at this place. Most of us do not know ourselves very well. Sure, we might know what our favorite color is or what our favorite car is or whatever else, but we don't know ourselves well enough to be able to say, here's how I'm wired and here's how I understand the way I am and why I am this way. This is, for example, why I would suggest that counseling services, psychologists, therapists are always going to have businesses, because people don't know themselves well. And when people don't know themselves well enough, they start making decisions and setting pathways that are really unhelpful for them, because they don't know what is the best fit for them. Does that make sense? Motivational. Welcome back. How are you? So that's really critical and important as we move forward, is understanding who we are, and understanding who we are so we can make the best decisions going forward. Are you someone who really thrives on working with your hands? Or would you rather sit behind a desk job and plunk away and use your mind instead? That's a really helpful thing to know. What kind of personality do you have? How do you respond in certain situations? Why do you respond in some situations this way instead of this way? Why is it that you feel like sometimes you don't know how to control your responses? All this is really critical for the self awareness piece, because the better we're able to know ourselves, the better we're able to know ourselves, the better we're able to make the best decisions as we navigate in this thing we call life. That's number one. Number two, the second pillar is kindness. Kindness is a really important one. And when you hear kindness right off the bat, you might be thinking, well, I think I'm a kind person to everyone else around me. I'm a nice person to be around. That's not what I'm talking about, dear listener. What I'm talking about here when I say kindness is kindness applied to ourselves. Kindness applied to ourselves because we've grown up in a context, I would suggest for most of us, where we are very intimately familiar with what it feels like to be criticized, to be ripped apart, to be judged. We know what it's like from our early years to feel rejected, based on who we are, what we do, where we're from, background wise, like so many parameters in which we are at the brunt end of being judged, or having people speak their assessment of us. And as that is usually in the critical zone, we have also in turn internalized how to do that for ourselves, I believe. So it might have been our parents, it might have been our family relatives, it might have been our friends or so called friends, it might have been society. Like there's so many parameters. Even consider if you're a female, consider how harshly society judges you based on your appearance. Do you know what I'm saying? And so they sort of like dismantle you. They compartmentalize you and saying, you got nice this, but you're terrible in this, or that kind of thing, just based on your presentation, or your perception. So, we, I think, all can experience or relate in what it feels like to be criticized. At some point, that has also been internalized, where we do that for our own selves. And then we become our worst critics. We become even more harsh in our assessment of ourselves than those external voices that are doing the same thing as well. And so this is where the second pillar comes in. How can we encourage each other as we go through life to be able to be kind to ourselves, to be able to show kindness and empathy and graciousness and patience and all those beautiful things that we readily give to those outside, around us, but don't give to ourselves. There's a bit of an imbalance there when we are kinder to those outside than we are to ourselves. And that's one of the pillars. That's the second pillar in which we've committed to, and saying, how can we learn to be kind to ourselves so that we can stop this awful pattern of ripping ourselves apart and tearing ourselves down? Because that's the narrative that's going on for so many of us. And so this is one of the pillars that we focus on to say, in on a daily basis, can we remind ourselves to be kind to ourselves? As we grow more aware of ourselves, what's going to happen is we're going to start seeing some of those things in our lives, those patterns that how can I say that we're not happy or thrilled about. We're like, okay, as I'm growing aware of myself, I notice I have an anger problem. I don't like my anger problem. I'm such a terrible person for being angry ongoing. That's one pattern, for example, that some of us might go through as we become more aware of ourselves. But that's why I put this as number two, the kindness piece. As you grow more aware of yourself, you're going to understand that you have some areas of growth, and as you address those areas of growth, don't address it by way of that narrative in your mind that says you're a terrible person for experiencing these. How can you instead be kind and patient with yourself to say, hey, I'm trying the best I can, and I want to move forward in a way that serves me so that it's not like you're beating yourself down. Does that make sense? That's why we hit this on a daily basis. That's why I don't tire of talking about these three key pillars, because they are so impacting. And until we sort of work it into our psyche, we're not going to benefit from the effects of doing this in an intentional way ongoing. So that's why I love giving space and time on this podcast to say, let's review these three things again, these three key pillars that I found super helpful for me, and that I also want to encourage you to consider in your own context. The third pillar, of course, is happiness. And happiness is one of those emotions that most of us love to experience, and yet it's also very elusive. I'm not singling out happiness from all of the other emotions because it's the most important. I'm singling it out because it's one of the fun ones that is great to arrive at and experience, but that only in balance with all the rest of the emotions. There are so many emotions, dear friends, so many feelings that all of us are intimately familiar with that are uncomfortable, that we are tempted to bury and pretend it's not there and sort of like stifle. So, feelings, for example, of jealousy, feelings, for example, of anger, feelings of worry or fear or concern or anxiety, like so many uncomfortable emotions that we're like, I don't know what to do with this. So, I'm going to just ignore it and stuff it down here. And here's what I've been observing over time. As we continue this process of stuffing and not dealing and learning how to deal with these uncomfortable emotions, these emotions start taking up space internally to create this context in our psyche, in our person, in our identity that wreaks a lot of havoc. It actually, I believe, takes up space. If you can imagine the real estate for your emotions internally, there's only so much real estate that you have. And when we stuff all these ones that we haven't dealt with for years, for some of us, decades, it starts to do some awful things in here. And as we try to experience the fun emotions like joy and happiness and optimism, like all those beautiful things we'd like to experience, we find there's not enough room in our real estate for emotions. And so I identify happiness as the one that I want to focus on and saying, how can we work towards this by processing all of the rest of the emotions that we may have been ignoring or trying to like downplay or pretend they're not there. This is to say, happiness is just as critical as all the other emotions that I mentioned that are very uncomfortable. And as we think about that, what would it look like for us to encourage each other to face those emotions and to process them and go through them and give them their space and learn how to express them in appropriate ways? That's also really important. So, those are the three key pillars of the Ben Checkin In podcast that I like to hit off every time we get together, even before we answer the self reflection question. The self reflection question is more of an exploration of all the other things around these three key pillars in my assessment. And so I hope this serves you well for those reasons so that you perhaps can also start on this pathway that I've been on for some time that I'm experiencing tremendous benefit, insight, and growth from. Today's question, like I said, was when was the last time you threw caution to the wind? And I was at the outset saying for some of us, this is easier than for others of us. I'm not sure where you line up. For me, I'm one of those people that is really like, I give the perception, dear friends, that I am yes, I'm in Calgary, Layla. How are you? I You can see the Calgary Tower just behind me. Here it is on the Instagram. And you of course can see it on YouTube. So Calgary, Alberta. Yes. um, yeah, so for some of us, like for me, I would say I'm one of those that gives this perception where I'm easygoing, I'm carefree, but that is, I mean, hmm, As much as that's the perception that most people take away when they interact with me, the reality is I'm extremely calculating. I'm very, and when I say it that way, um, it's not a bad thing. I'm just very careful in the way I engage. I'm very systematic. I was getting together for, last night on a date, for example, and on this date, it turned out to be not a green light going forward, right? And but we had a great time. Like I was able to systematically like go through in the way I usually do and getting to know someone, and it seemed very like off the cuff and like spontaneous. But in my mind, I'm very, very systematic in the way I try to get to know and understand someone and their context and things that are important for us to talk about and that kind of thing. So that's an example of how I am. So when I think about a question like today, I'm kind of like, eek, I don't know how to just throw caution to the wind because I'm a very cautious individual. I'm very careful in the way I proceed forward and establish the forward momentum that I'm going through in life. That's really important to me. So one of the ways I help people understand my MO, my way of operating is I am very aware of where my boundaries are. I have some very clearly defined boundaries. And as I acknowledge what those boundaries are, as I identify and articulate and talk about what those boundaries mean, and I know them very well, within those boundaries, I am super free. I'm like all over the place. I am the freest person within the boundaries that I've set. That's why it seems I'm so carefree. I'm very open. I'm very spontaneous because I know where my boundaries are and where I can play with abandon. Coming up to those boundaries, though, when I experience those boundaries or the point at which they might be broken, that's when I'm like, actually, let's reassess this and identify again why I have these boundaries in place. So that's me. For others of you, you may be like, boundaries? What boundaries? And then you'll be like all over the place. You'll be like, ah! And your life may uh, be very much like spontaneous that way. I'm not wired that way. That's not my MO per se, but that's kind of like how I go forward. So, as I engage, by the way, to my listeners on the Instagram, for some reason, the last few days, I haven't been able to see my chat feed going up. So, I'm not sure what's going on there. So, if you are interacting with me there, I apologize. I'm not seeing any of your comments, but I'm so glad that you're there. I'll try to figure out why it's doing that, but I don't know. It's kind of uncertain for me sometimes on the Instagram. But I'm thrilled to have you here. So, as I think about this question again, for me, it's one of trepidation that I approach this question. When was the last time you threw caution to the wind? There's a certain sense of being free or flexible in one's expectations that I see in this question. There's a certain sense of saying, how can you let loose and relinquish control to that which you are unable to, especially in this context. So that's one of the things that I'm identifying when I consider this question. And when was the last time? It's almost as if it's happened. And I know there's a few instances in my life where I have thrown caution to the wind, but it's very rare when I do that. Why can't a bike stand? It was too tired. Little boy, I am a fan of dad jokes, and that is an exemplary one. I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. I shared it with the rest of those who are listening in. Why can't a bike stand? It was too tired. That is fantastic. I liked it. I like that. Thank you for sharing that little chuckle. So, yes, when was the last time? Now, let me ask a question. Is it beneficial for us to, on occasion, throw caution to the wind? That sounds really irresponsible for some of us, like myself. It's like, yikes, have we considered all of the parameters that are going to be affected by this decision to throw caution to the wind? Because caution, in my assessment, usually keeps us safe, right? Caution is the kind of thing that enables us to look both ways before we cross the street. Caution is that thing that gets us to maybe just check before we put our hand on a potentially hot surface. Caution is that thing that can save lives, right? Why would one throw caution to the wind? Caution is that thing that keeps you from making bad decisions. Caution is that thing that keeps you from walking blindly into settings that you may not be super familiar with. So, hmm, is it a good thing on occasion to throw caution to the wind? Ooh, this makes me just squirm when I think about this because I'm just thinking, how can I give my honest response? And honestly, I will say, I believe it is It's not necessary or mandatory, but it's not a bad thing to throw caution to the wind sometimes. And I would say this for the following reasons. For those of us like me who struggle with this kind of a question, we are, in some sense, control freaks. We like to control how things are going to work out. We like to know all the answers before we get there. For example, when I'm watching movies, one of the things I want to do is I want to know what's going on. Many people, unlike me, love this spontaneous and unexpected element. They like being surprised. They don't want the storyline or the narrative to be spoiled. Me, on the other hand, I want to play God. I do not like being surprised. I want to know exactly what's going on so I can forecast and be ready for it. If I could, I would know what my future looks like, but I don't have access. So I play God in my life by trying to understand what I can control by seeing what kind of control I can exert. I'm a control freak. So I will go ahead and read the synopsis of the movie so that I'm not easily surprised. So I know what's coming up. And then I can kind of relax and enjoy what's going on because I feel I have that sense of control. In this question, when we throw caution to the wind, we're in essence saying we're throwing control, that ability to control, away. And for control freaks like myself, we don't relinquish control very well, do we? We want to hang on to it and we want to like be able to say, oh, this is my safe zone, this is my comfort zone. And so to step outside of that, oh yeah, yeah, that is a tough one. That is a tough one. Oh, so along those lines, when I think about this element here of throwing caution to the wind, it is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. And yet, I think for that reason, it is helpful for people like myself to, on occasion, be willing to throw caution to the wind. It is okay and maybe even encouraged to experience what it's like to relinquish control. That's a tough thing for me to acknowledge. Oh, because I don't do it well. And that's probably why I struggled as much as I did with what is my response to this question? Like I say, I'm coming down to the end of questions that I've been answering on these self reflection gamuts. And yeah, this is one I was like, I don't know what to answer on this one, but I think I have a fairly decent answer. Um, so yeah, when's the last time I threw caution to the wind? And maybe like another way of answering this question would be how often would you feel is necessary to throw caution to the wind? For some of you, it might be I need to pull back on that because I'm doing it way too often and I see the effects in my life. For others of you, you might be like, I don't want to do it. And so you might be compelled or maybe encouraged to start relinquishing in incremental stages what caution could look like in whatever area it is that you feel uncomfortable in relinquishing control or caution. It's quite an interesting analogy, isn't it? It's like a picture image. Imagine like caution being like this well articulated sort of paper that has all the things that you want to make sure are in your sphere of control. And you've painstakingly written them out and it's just perfect. And then you take that piece of paper on a windy day and then you let the wind take it. That's a really, really painful thing to do. It's like, no, come back. And once it's gone, it just kind of the wind takes it where it will, where the wind takes it where it will, and that's an uncomfortable thing to prepare for, isn't it? Oh, oh, it's just like I don't know if I can do this, and yet that's what we're being encouraged to do. Can you guys feel how uncomfortable of a question this is for me? You can see why I struggle with this now, right? It's like, oh. I want you guys to see me squirm because there are so many ways in which I give the presentation or the perception of competence and having everything well put together. And the reality is, in actuality, I really struggle in so many ways. And that's why I appreciate sharing my experiences. But here is my response to this question here. The last time I threw caution to the wind was a few months back when I made the decision to stop driving for Uber. Not indefinitely, because I'll still be driving for Uber again. And I love driving for Uber. They're just, yeah, I have nothing but raving reviews of my time with Uber. But I took a break so that I could focus on a business that I was trying to put together. And so that was when I threw caution to the wind when I made that decision, because that was a really scary thing. Because I'm like, okay, this is really risky and gutsy. It was a calculated risk, mind you. It was very gutsy for me to move into this zone of unfamiliarity business wise. It was also risky and gutsy for me to move into a zone of lack of guarantees. I am not assured that this is going to go well in my favor. Hello, how are you? That was really challenging. So that was a real step in me throwing caution to the wind. And my goodness, I savored the whole process. You guys can go back into episodes that I've recorded here in the last couple of months where I was just coming on here and saying, guys, I think I'm way over my head. I don't know how this is going to pan out. I don't know how this is going to turn out, if it's going to work successfully or not in my favor. I have no idea. And yet I just kind of walked right into it. And as I walked into it, it was just like, oh, I have no assurances. I have no guarantees, but I know this is a really important experience for me to have. A really important experience because in the absence of this experience, I would always be asking the question, should I have tried it? And I would have been plagued with that thought of, I never actually tried, so I don't know how it would have turned out. At the at this point now, I know how it turned out, and it didn't quite work out in the way I had hoped it would. But regardless, I'm still at this place where I'm like, I'm so glad I still went through with it. I'm still glad I experienced it. I'm still glad I have the story to tell about it, even though I'm still learning and growing as a result from it. So it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy, but it was important. And so I'm super grateful for that opportunity. And so that's why I think that this question is really an important one for all of us to ask. Because when we find those opportunities to, in some sense, relinquish control and throw caution to the wind, metaphorically speaking, it enables us to be able to to be able to face those things that we would like to think aren't there, especially in terms of how we might want to play God, how we might want to control the outcome of things. And yeah, that's one of my areas that I need to work on. There are so many things that I've done really well in my evolution and my personal growth, but this is one of those that I feel is really important for me um, to attend to and say, hey, how can I think intentionally through this and then make sure there's space for this to be expressed? I'm one of those that definitely needs some encouragement to let loose sometimes, to take a little rest, to step outside of my comfort zone. Because man, do I love my comfort zone. I love the poshness, the luxuriousness that I feel of being in my comfort zone. I like when I'm not stretched in ways that are uncomfortable. And when I usually have those opportunities to be stretched, when I usually have those opportunities in which it's like, oh, this is not going to be fun, I would choose not to take them. I would be like, I'll take a rain check, thank you. But thankfully, life doesn't permit us that often. Life usually puts us in the middle of things and scenarios whereby we're like, oh, this is tough. This really sucks. But I'm going to go through it because it's for my good and it's going to serve me well. Friends, part of experiencing what I'm describing to you has to do with finding who your people are in life, who are your close friendships, who are the ones that you can reach out to and say, I'm having this experience on the forecast. It's a scary one. It's kind of shaking me. I don't know how to like prepare for it. When you are in community that is really supportive and affirming and good, it makes these kind of moments a lot easier to navigate through. If you're on your own, it can be super difficult. It can be really hard and intimidating and daunting. And so that's why I would really encourage, if you don't have those kind of people in your life that have your back, what would it take like what would it take for you to start looking for those like-minded individuals? What would it look like for you to start extending yourself a little bit to be able to express interest in others and saying, hey, can I hang out with you? Can I spend time with you? It's a vulnerable thing. It's a very scary thing. And that might be one of the things that enables you to fulfill what we're talking about today and throwing caution to the wind. Many of us desire that point of connection in an intimate way, but it's really inaccessible. But it's worthwhile, and I'd highly encourage you to do so. Send me a message in my inbox if you would like some help along that way. I will hopefully see you guys tomorrow for episode 95. Thanks for being here. Love you guys.